Welcome, everybody, to the first Clean Facts Know-How cross-collaboration webinar. Very excited for this. Short memories, lasting knowledge, training strategies for retention and recall. Please, if you're joining here, jump into the chat and let us know where you're tuning in from. Excited to see just where everyone's at, both in their journey of training and equipping teams, and also just physically where they're at. It's always fun to see people from all over North America join these discussions. My name is Travis Martin. I'm the Vice President of Product and Marketing and Know-How, and I'm really excited about this panel today. I'll go around the table and give some brief introductions, and then we'll dive a little bit deeper into everyone's background and the unique perspective they bring to this really important topic. First off, we've got Leighton Healy. He's the CEO of Know-How here. He has been doing this a long time, both on the construction side and now in tech, but the through line has been training and equipping people throughout that whole journey. Davin Sullivan is the Learning Program Manager at Blue Sky Restoration Contractors. And the background in education, Davin's really going to bring a unique perspective here. Excited to dive into it. And Lisa Browning is a restoration training strategist with almost 20 years combined experience in the home building and disaster restoration industries. So, hey, thank you all for joining us today. This is going to be a great discussion. If you have questions come up throughout this conversation, please throw them in the chat. We definitely want this to be a dynamic discussion, and we want it to be as targeted as possible to some of the pains and frustrations and problems you're trying to solve in your company, wherever you're at. But as far as introductions go, let's keep it going. And Leighton, maybe I'll throw it to you first. Give us a bit of a synopsis on your background and the cross section of training development and why this topic is so important to you.
Well, it's important to me because I'm a big believer in, I use the term people-powered industries, right? Industries where, people are central to how work gets done. And that's always been my focus. And so I think my interest in training people probably started at a young age. My dad was a preacher and a writer, and I'm really a master communicator. And so I had a lot of time spent just observing him as a communicator and connecting with people. And then I got into business at a young age, and I was 19. I had a couple dozen staff, trying to get a trades company going, and just recognize I had to equip people. And that required me to go beyond kind of what was at that time a very shy, soft-spoken, mumbling person, and I had to learn how to train and equip people, and that led me to eventually being the recipient of an incredible training and development program, actually by For Service Brands, Paul Davis, CertaPro. I was kind of one of their superstar franchise owners, and later on their executive team, and worked my way up to becoming one of the youngest examiners, the people who are kind of like almost like the faculty of their program. And that led just that passion led me to do my graduate studies in leadership coaching and leadership development and training. And so it's been a passion. And how do you take complicated things and make them simple and digestible is something that I'm quite passionate about, because I've seen the difference that training can make in a person's life personally, and through expressions of that in my work. So it's a topic I'm very passionate about.
Thanks for that. And thanks for sharing, Leighton. Excited to dive deeper. Davin, let's throw it to you next. I'd love to learn a little bit more about your background and what led you to the unique position that you're in now.
Yes, so I'm going to probably take you guys on a full, hold on, it's going to be whiplash. So my background is in education, kind of like Travis said. I've actually taught every grade from pre-K through fifth grade before I transitioned out of the classroom about 10 years ago. Um, I've been all over the place. I really think that's a lot to do with this, the way that I approach everything now. It's because I have that background in education, and that's what my master's is in. But I think I really just got inspired by the world of adult learning during a pre-K professional development session by Marcia Tate. And if you don't know who she is, go look her up. She's actually not on LinkedIn. but she has a website, and her approach to just intentional brain-based strategies are not just helpful for children, but for adults. And I use her practices now in everything that I build. But during that session, I realized that she was teaching me the strategies that she uses for children. And it was just, it was like an aha moment. Like, I want to do this. I want to, be involved with adult learning and shaping things. So fast forward, I've kind of had a crazy journey through since then. Worked in as a learning consultant in leadership development. And I really just like ultimately feel like training and development really gives us the ability to solve real business challenges through our people. And it's just that perfect blend of strategy, creativity, and unlocking the potential of everybody and just making work better. So that's kind of my love for L&D. That's where it came from.
Very cool to hear. No, and I think there has been so much good work done when it comes to how do you train and equip kids, that a lot of those lessons are probably applicable for adult learners as well if we apply them. So excited to dive more into that. Lisa, let's throw it to you. Want to hear a little bit more about your background. You've got a wide variety of experience, which is awesome to hear. And so let's talk about just what led you to where you are today.
Yeah, for sure. So I think similar to Davin, I'll start in my earlier career. I worked for a home builder for just over 12 years. I actually started, they had a mortgage company that was integrated with the home building company. I started with that side of the business first, and I worked with our loan officers to develop training for realtors and offering CE credits, to develop training for home buyers and educating home buyers on the benefits of buying a home. And we kind of traveled around and did educational seminars and group teachings for several years. And so that was kind of my introduction to training and teaching others. And I loved it. I'm a huge people person. And so anytime I can get in front of people and talk, I'm in. And then from there, I moved to the home building side, and I actually pioneered a new position for the company, which was a huge success. And then they hired more of me, I guess, so to speak. And I helped train that position in every other region that we were in. And so I developed all of the training material. I trained, the other members that were being brought onto the team to take on this new role. And then from there, I moved into a corporate position where I was doing corporate onboarding, orientation, and training team members company-wide. So even though it wasn't my primary function, it's what I loved most. And then after that, I went into restoration, and I can share, I guess, a little tidbit about that experience when I was first hired with this restoration company. It was a small company. I talked to the owner. He was the one who hired me. He's like, come in on this day at this time, and we'll get you started. I'm like, great, awesome. So I show up. He's not there, and nobody knows I'm supposed to be there. And so I sat in a conference room for about 45 minutes waiting for him. No call, no text, no nothing. And finally, I just messaged him and I said, I'm out. Let me know if you're going to head back this way anytime soon. And he did call me shortly after and apologized profusely. So I did turn around and I went back. In hindsight, that should have been a huge red flag for me, but I'd never experienced that before. And so from that point with that company, I vowed no other employee is going to experience what I experienced. And so I really took on creating an onboarding and orientation program for that company. After that, I moved into consulting, and almost every company that we worked with, hiring and onboarding and training was a huge gap. And so that's primarily what my focus has been in the consulting industry for restoration companies specifically. So here we are.
Wow. Thanks for sharing, Lisa. And
Yeah.
I'm sorry about that experience. It's probably not as unique as you would hope for.
It's not actually, come to
Yeah.
find out.
Yeah, I bet. But hey, I think the fact that it channeled you in the direction of caring so much about that experience is actually a great transition into my first question. A lot of,
Yeah.
I think we don't think about the cost of not training people properly until we see that cost laid out in front of us. And when you're building things and when you're an owner and you're excited, you're maybe not necessarily thinking about how critical good training is until you see the consequences of bad training. And so, Leighton, I'll throw it to you first, but I'm curious to get your perspective. What have you seen is the consequence when training is done poorly or just not done at all? What happens in an organization?
You know, I think that there's if you were to picture like two doors, one door where the trainer leaves the room and the other door where the learners leave the room, and then you were to just microphone those hallways as they walk out, very commonly someone who would consider themselves the trainer would say, I hit them with a fire hose, right? You'll often hear this term, I hit them with a fire hose, and there's almost a sense of pride in that. And I think that they are expressing that they left it all out there, right? Or they wanted to, in a sense, almost overwhelm them so that they'll take it seriously how much they need to learn. And then the learner will leave and they'll feel a sense of feeling overwhelmed, or they'll feel like the content was very disjointed, or they'll feel like, or they'll almost express like just relief that it's done, right? So they can just kind of move on. And those 2 points very rarely, I would say, come out aligned, and that's a problem. And a lot of it comes down to oftentimes in these trades-based industries, in these service-based industries, the same person who develops the acumen, the how-to, sometimes that person, just doesn't. They've never had an opportunity for someone to show them how do you um, develop kind of a teaching and a training orientation. How do you actually structure a learning event so that you can actually people can benefit from this well of experience, this well of knowledge that you have, and how do you put that in a format that is a good use of their time. And so fundamentally, common learner complaints is that they feel overwhelmed or buried by the content. They feel that there's a lot of pressure because the in-person training is really in many ways the only vehicle by which training is really delivered. Um, or you often hear complaints from trainers where they'll say, learners didn't come prepared, or they didn't, or they're getting questions and they'll say, well, didn't we cover this in training? And a lot of it, I think it stems back to the same things I think we'll talk about today. But I think it was George Bernard Shaw who said the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it's taken place. And I think that's often it can be said for a lot of training where a lot of words are spoken, but not a lot of meaning was necessarily distilled.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious, both Lisa and Davin. I mean, Lisa, you've been on the side of both the trainee and the trainer. But I think if you were to point to frustrations like Leighton mentioned of the trainee just feeling like, they just didn't get the information they need, a lot of trainers would kind of wring their hands, be like, I delivered the information, right? It's not my fault. I want to hear from your perspective because I think it probably aligns with the perspective of people in the audience as well. What are some of the frustrations that trainers experience when it comes to training and development as well? Maybe Lisa, I'll throw it to you first and then over to you, Devin.
Yeah, I would say the most common one that I hear is I don't have time, which is kind of crazy.
Mhm.
We're investing in these people that we're hiring for the company to make a difference, to make an impact, to help the company grow, and then to not have time to invest in training those people is hard. I had a situation, one of the very first companies that I contracted with in a consultant role, they had a mitigation director. And he was amazing. He was so smart. He was a master restorer. He was respected on the team. He just was this wealth of knowledge, but he also held on to things and he created this bottleneck. And so when new team members were brought on, he was kind of like, I have all these other things to do that are so important. Let me put you in front of a computer for 8 hours so you can do some online learning, right? And so it was almost like a dish off. So you got to do this first, and then I'll put you with somebody else so you can ride along and see how things go. And I think ultimately it created a horrible first impression. This was one of the companies who didn't have a proper onboarding and training program. There was no plan in place. There was no career path, right? So this is the first impression, kind of similar to mine, that these people are getting like, oh, my manager forgot about me and put me in front of a computer. And yes, it's necessary. There's some e-learning aspects and they're learning things, but I think we'll get into this too. There's different types of learning, right? There's audio, there's visual, there's kinesthetic. Who's your audience? How do they best learn? And does how you're training, can that be applied to all of those different learning styles so that it's taken in? Um, and this is not. So anyway, it created a bad first impression. It made the employees doubt if they really wanted to be there. And it also created resentment amongst the rest of the team because then they're felt left like they're holding the bag or they're behind in some way. And there's an image that comes to mind. Somebody shared with me a long time ago. It's this guy, and there's a wall, and he's trying to get over the wall, and there's a pile of ladders next to him, a pile of ladders. So it's like they delivered the tools, but they didn't show him how to use them. They didn't show him how to apply it, right? So now he can't get over the wall. But anyway.
Wow. Hey, that's a good analogy. And as you're talking, Elaine, I'm starting to like detect some characters here. I'm detecting like the fireman with the fire hose of information.
Yeah.
I'm detecting the linchpin of the organization, right, where everything has to go through. There's a cast of characters that are starting to emerge as we uncover some of the problems in training that exist right now in the restoration industry. Davin, I'm curious from your perspective, what have been some of those barriers or frustrations, especially on the delivery side, when it comes to where, like Leighton said, George Bernard Shaw, people feel like communication has taken place, but the seeds haven't taken root.
Well, a couple of the issues that we face pretty regularly is people not coming because it's hard to develop the culture of learning in our industry because we've got, especially in some of the companies I've worked for, is we have this blend of frontline workers, and then you've got your office style and that have access to the computer. And so a lot of the times they're not showing up to these mandatory trainings potentially. And so like that's a huge issue. We can't even get feedback on, where they are in the process or if it was helpful for them if they're not showing up, for one. And then when we get some there, another complaint is people just aren't engaged during the training, which is another rabbit hole. If somebody asked me my opinion on that, like we really need a deep dive and see what you guys are saying and doing and how you're delivering that information, kind of like Lisa said. If it's boring, I'm probably not going to be engaged either. But it's like those are a lot of times too, we have like band-aid trainings, like we're reactive. So we're going to go in and here's the problem from this subject matter expert in, whatever new tool we're going to roll out for our, jobs and opportunities or whatever it is. And then we react and we build something really fast, but we didn't really step back and think about the whole picture. And so because of that and not involving all the key stakeholders that might necessarily have like really great input across the different departments, it really creates a bottleneck of issues for us because, they didn't have that ability to see where the issues were going to be down the line. They just wanted to solve the problem at that moment. So my role is a little unique because I do train, but I also there's people that are training, and so that's kind of my job is to see those roadblocks and how we're going to make sure everything is covered at the best that we can before we roll out and really understand what the goal is of that training before we roll anything out and we can avoid some of those issues.
Awesome. And you know what? We were getting some good comments, and thanks, Kathy. The reactive training is such a good point, right? You see something blow up and you deal with it, and you see something blow up and you deal with it, which is good. I suppose, restoration by nature is reactive, but there's not a long-term strategy that's informing, that's building out the road ahead of people. You're letting the crises of the day determine your priorities. But Davin, you talked about this rabbit hole, and we got time. Let's dive into this rabbit hole, right? Because I think so much of the problem, we would all agree, is delivering content, and then oftentimes the trainer feels like the box was checked of words spoken in their mind, without just really thinking about the experience of the learner. And so I'll throw it back to you, Devin. You were mentioning just unengaging content. And I think it's probably something that every trainer has complained. Well, like the worker just wasn't engaged. They just didn't seem interested in what we were teaching them. What is your response when someone says that?
Well, first of all, I'm going to take the whole survey, not just that one response, because there's like we said, there's different learning styles and things like that. So I'm gonna take the whole survey at a glance and really dive into that before I make any kind of crazy calls. But I'm really gonna look at, um, did I deliver what they need to be successful at the end of this? And when we chatted earlier, one of my biggest things, because I'm in education, and I'm sure there's these wonderful words, and I always joke because I am from the education world, so I tend to always use that verbiage, but it's called a backwards design, right? And so I want to make sure that my end goal, that I've developed the objective based off what I want that person to walk away doing. And from there, then I'm going to build in those activities and interactivity, right? How I'm going to engage them, because it can't just be I stand at the front of the room, I lecture. In Teams, when you get like or even Zoom, I know Teams does, we're a Teams company, but when you get the recording after, and it shows everybody and when they spoke. If the instructor is green almost the whole time, then you're probably not doing a great job. That's another thing I might look at and be like, hey, can you send me your recording metrics? Like, how much are you talking? Can you not talk as much? And how could you flip it and change the way that you are engaging your audience to where, yes, you know the information and that's why you're here to share, but how could you language it to pull that information from the individuals to where it's not, you know, it's just you and we're just wah wah wah, because that's when we lose them. That's one of the things. And I know we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but it really goes into like quality of content, and that's super important. And don't get me wrong, I love things that are beautiful and that have like organization and structure. I like thrive in that environment. It makes me super happy. But like I can give you all the I can you know what? I have 4 kids. So let me break it down to this. If I buy my kid a brand new BMW, just rolled off the lot, 2025 model, and I don't ever teach them how to drive it, it's either going to collect dust or they're going to wreck it. And that's the same thing with our training programs. It's in any session. If we don't take the time to really dive in and look at what the end goal is, then that's the rabbit hole.
Yeah. Hey, great. And I think both me and every other driver in your city appreciates your model of training before just giving someone a BMW. Lisa, let me throw it to you next. Why is just focusing on the quality of content alone not enough?
Quality is subjective, right? And I think that goes to the learning styles too. So we have to, excuse me, we have to take that into account. We have to adapt the communication style to the learner, including those 3 different learning styles: the listening, the seeing, the touch, all of those things. And there's a method that I've seen be successful in the past. I think we'll get into that. Um, but it's also about engaging the right people in the training and training those people on how to train. So I'm not going to stand in front of water technicians and teach them how to, you know, extract water or set up dehues or whatever it is. But I can train someone on how to train that information and what the best way to get that information across is using, different training techniques or training methods. And then identifying who are those people that we want to do the training. Is it someone who cuts corners? Probably not. Is it someone who does it right the first time and really takes pride in their work? Yep, that would be a good candidate, right? But we also have to get their buy-in and then treat them accordingly as well. If we're using kind of a subject matter expert in the field, how do we get them bought into the idea of being a trainer for the company? Do we give them a little perk? Do we give them a little something? Do you agree, Devin?
Yeah, I was just gonna bounce off of you though, because right now I'm rolling out some cohorts, and I specialize right now in with our sales individuals
Yeah.
for our company, but championing some of these people that are doing a great job, kind of like you said,
Yep.
but it kind of goes into that quality though. I can build something beautiful for them to deliver. But if I just hand it off and just roll on and be like, yep, check the box, gave them the content, and now I will set up the sessions for them and I will live my very best life. Um, that is not that's not helpful.
Right.
So the intentionality around, I guess, two parts is making sure that our people, our staff that are going to be carrying out these subject matter experts that are going to be training. So when we train those trainers,
Yep. Train the
that
trainer.
they respect that it's coming from the learning, like we're experts in learning, right?
Yeah.
And so being open to trying some of these things and these engagement techniques, and then also just spending the time to go through the deck and teach them how to really deliver the content is super important. And so that's been a huge focus for me with my team members to make sure that they are prepared, they feel comfortable with the content, but also in the delivery and that they know that I'll support them and how to engage with the audience.
And stop me if I'm getting off track. Do you have a way that you create value or show the value behind them really engaging in this training and taking that on per the learning department, like, what your goal is? Like, how do you get them bought in? Like, how do you show that value to them?
To the be well to the
The
subject
subject
matter
matter
experts
experts.
that are
Yeah.
not in the learning department.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, a couple things that thinking about succession planning. Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Mhm.
If you want to continue in the role that you are, then you just continue doing what you're doing. But if you have that goal, then you have to stretch yourself. And so that's one of the conversations that I have with their bosses on who are people that you feel like are going to step into some, leadership roles in the future. And this is the first steps in getting them into those roles. And then the other part is when people are doing a good job and you tell them they're doing a good job, that's usually all it takes for them to be willing to buy in. Um, I've spent a ton of time building rapport with these individuals as well. That's always like super important to me. But the spending that time knowing that the value it's going to bring and to the people that they're sharing it for, and then them just feeling like they have that voice. Some people don't care to move up. They just want to
Yeah.
they just want to share because you're like, wow, I didn't realize that what I had to say was important. And when you say, hey, no, you're awesome. Like, I would love for you to do this. And you're like, okay, like, I don't care. You don't even have to pay me. Like, I will do it. The other way I balance it is to make sure that I am considerate of their time.
Mhm.
And so this cohort that I'm running right now is all on sales strategy, and I have 4 different topics, and I'm running them quarterly. And so what I do is I get a ton of individuals that are subject matter experts, and I schedule them to where the load is not a lot, right? So being aware of their time, that this is not their job, that they're doing this to be supportive to our company as a whole and then making it a team effort. That's my approach.
Yeah, I love that.
That's great. And I think it's, it can be a little intimidating as the trainer when you go to that water mitigation expert to kind of tell them how to do the job of training. But I think, Lisa, exactly what you said, they would tell you, hey, here's how we, tear out baseboard, here's how we do a flood cut. But the skill of how do you deliver training in a way that resonates with people is what you're an expert in. And they likely just have not spent as much time thinking and growing and refining that skill as you have as the training, learning, development person in the organization. So, Leighton, I want to throw it to you next. I know you deliver lots of talks, you've delivered tons of workshops and trainings over the years. And just to get tactical, like if you're going beyond just was content delivered, but you're looking for ways to just stir up reflection, have the learner start to feel about how does this directly apply? What's the mindset shift that needs to happen among the trainer?
So to be an excellent trainer, to be an excellent facilitator, you first you have to encourage the person who desires to train to understand that there is first an awareness that they have to have. So Gary Chapman wrote a popular book, The Five Love Languages, right? I could boil it down by simply saying this. His perspective is that everybody receives love in one dominant way. And a mistake that people often make is that you give love the way you prefer to receive love. And so if a person, really loves let's call it quality time with someone, then the way they give love is quality time. If that's how I'm loved, that's how you want to be loved. And the point of the book is simply that actually by recognizing how people prefer to experience love and then giving it them in that format, that actually and then communicating how you prefer to receive love, that actually you can have just a more vibrant exchange. And the same thing goes with trainers in that oftentimes a trainer, that mind, that unique mind that allowed them to acquire and synthesize all these concepts and to understand them in such detail, that mind that has prepared them to be a great trainer oftentimes does is very different from the people in the group that don't have that mind. And so there's an awareness that's necessary to say, maybe this is how I prefer to communicate or talk or train or learn, but rarely is that the way that the learner prefers to learn. So great trainers first have an awareness of saying, I need to move from what we would refer to kind of that expert mindset to a very service oriented mindset. If you can imagine if I'm doing a talk, there's things that I think need to be said, but really I'm much more interested in understanding who's in the audience and what do they need to hear. Right? You can imagine a musician on stage. Maybe they love Atlanta, Georgia, but if they're in Dallas, Texas, they better make sure that their comments land regionally, right?
Right.
And at the same thing with a trainer. So the trainer has to have a level of an awareness. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes trainers they get bristled because they think the disengagement in the group is actually a lack of respect for what they've amassed in experience and knowledge. But in really what it is just people responding to a weakness in that trainer, which is they just haven't learned skills that actually work, that engage and draw in the learner. So they have to move from this respect what I know to a serve the learner. And this is an industry where people love certifications and methodologies and all the details and whatnot. And most people who step into the trainer role might be surprised to learn that there is a whole world of methodologies and tactics. Davin and Lisa were referring to some of those. And so just to give it, I'll just some really practical elements. I'll just boil it down to these three things. Number one is that when you're developing training, one of the most important things is to start by defining what's referred to often as the purpose and what are the learning outcomes. Purpose is really what's the point? We're all so busy. What's the point, right? And I often push on people to say, I'll even play the devil's advocate and I'll say, you know what? Cancel the training. And the defensive response that they come back to, that's often the purpose. Right? They're like, what are you talking about? If we don't train, we're going to be screwed come frozen pipes. There you go. That's the purpose. They're like, oh, I see what you did there. Right. And then the learning outcomes is really around a way to think about it is what does the learner need to leave with that they don't have now? right? I often will say in the goodie bag that they go home with, what needs to be in there? And there is a little bit of a, let's call it a science to framing and wording learning outcomes. And so I'll just provide just, three examples because sometimes it's actually helpful to hear how you word a training outcome because they need to be tangible. They need to be something that you can actually quantify. So for example, learning outcome might sound like this, learners leave having role modeled each step of the 10-stage sales process with another colleague, right? Because I can tell they did or they didn't. Each participant has completed one draft report and received feedback identifying one or more areas of improvement. Or participants have witnessed a live role model of each of the four segments of our conflict resolution model and leave with a scheduled role play meeting with the supervisor. So again, when you have those tangible outcomes for a trainer, it's actually much easier because they say, now all I got to do is just get them to that little outcome. And it tends to clear the clouds, remove the mist, and say, so you're telling me in 30 minutes, I just need everyone in this room to have just test drove two aspects of our sales methodology? Yep. With the person beside them? Yep. I can do that. Right. And and then there's other elements to it, and I just love to defer to Davin and Lisa here. But there's an awareness. There is a kind of a service orientation that a person has to take on. There is I would say a need to have an awareness of how the people in their group probably prefer to learn, and there's a lot of good science on that. But it's amazing how quickly a course or a session or a workshop can come together when you simply know what's the point of having it and what do they need to leave with that they don't have now. We can obviously get into the weeds, but those are some, I would say, some pillars.
Awesome. We're talking about this training the trainer and the skill of just helping reorient the experts in your company on how to deliver training in a way that resonates and ultimately that knowledge will be retained among the end worker. Davin, I'm curious, you have a background in education, but you've been helping corporate training for quite a while now. How have you helped reorient those subject matter experts to turn their eyes towards delivering training in a way that resonates with the end worker?
I take a consultative approach during my discovery calls, and when I'm diving into what do you want to do? Because I get a lot of requests. It's like, we need training for this, and I was like, okay, great, that sounds wonderful. We'll set up a meeting, and the title of that meeting will be whatever that you said that you wanted the training on. But that whole call for me is they don't know what they don't know. So my whole job is to determine what the actual problem is. And it's probably not 9 times out of 10 what they think the training issue is. So I have to go through, and I'm from the South, so it's called, I go around by Laura's house, which means I have to go way out of the way to figure it out. But I have to go, and it usually takes me time to go and dig and talk to several other stakeholders to really identify the problem. Where's the gap? And once I know the gap, then I can approach them back with, hey, I heard what you said, but I really feel like your problem is this. And that's the way I have to start it, because they always have this idea, and once again they're always short-sighted a lot of the times, unless you have somebody that has a little bit of L&D background in another department. They've got some kind of background where they're thinking through some of those other potential issues. But I have to find the actual issue first, and then once I can relate to them on, this is not your problem, this is the problem, and you're experiencing these things because of this problem, then it's a lot easier to get buy-in. And then they're like, oh, you know what? That makes sense. And maybe it's not a training issue, maybe it's a process issue, but that's a lot of the times. And then we have to train on the new process that we realize that there is a gap in. But a lot of times I try to focus on and I encourage anybody, listening on the call, is that if you're in an L&D seat and you're talking to your departments, or even, somebody, like we have VPs and DOOs and PDs, like we have a ton of roles. But if you're talking to one of those individuals and they have a problem, don't be scared to push back and ask for clarity and dive in until you find the actual root of the problem, and then provide those solutions. And now I'm not sure, I went around by Laura's house again, but maybe I answered your question, Travis.
And I'll just add, Davin, that sometimes what I've how I've looked at that is, I think what you're describing is a symptom of a problem, of a deeper problem.
Absolutely.
And he's I think that this is, when we push here, it hurts there. So I want to know what this is. You're
Right.
describing this. And I find those like, okay, well, I'm open-minded. I'm open to talking about that. It sounds like what's downstream of this problem is what you're experiencing. And so it's a very interesting activity. I think that what I've often seen is that a lot of L&D individuals, especially, over the last 10 years, there's been a real resurgence of like learning management systems, and they allow a learning-oriented person to present their content in such an elegant way. And I find sometimes they can get bogged down in the creative element, when now with the world of generative AI, so much of that work is just, a click away, a prompt away. And the work that you're describing, I just think that, like, I just hope there's a resurgence of what you're describing, because that is such important detective work.
Yeah, the consultant piece is where I have a huge passion in that area, and deep diving into identifying your problem, and I feel like that's what's made several things that I've been a part of successful, is just because I don't take you at face value. I'm not going to listen to your complaint or your request, if I'm being very kind. And, I'm going to actually deep dive into the situation to identify where that root is. So yeah, that's my outlook on it always.
Yeah, very good. Lisa, let me throw it to you. What
Yeah.
do the best trainers do to adapt their communication style to what that learner ultimately needs, if that knowledge is going to be retained long term?
For sure. So I think this kind of goes back to Leighton's analogy of the love languages, right? We have to adapt our communication style to our learner so that it sticks. And one of the most successful methods that I've seen is referred to as the IDEA method. It's an acronym. So IDEA is instruct, demonstrate, experience, and assess. And I can go through each of these pieces, but each of them touches on the three different learning styles. Some people have one, some people have all three. There's usually one primary, right? But the IDEA method is structured on the job training. And that could include classroom or e-learning or in-field, a combination of all the things. But again, it's going back to from our dedicated trainers or peer-to-peer who are subject matter experts in the field and trained on how to train others. This is kind of where everything comes full circle. When they use the IDEA method, they start with instruction, right? So they tell them about the job that they're going to teach. That's the first time the trainee is hearing it. This is the audio part, right? The listening. So they're providing an overview of the process, they're explaining the steps, they're focusing on key points, and they're including a description of what good performance looks like. This is what we're training on, this is how to do it, and this is what a successful outcome is. So then that trainee knows, okay, this is what the expectation is, this is what I need to know how to do. Then they demonstrate it. They show them. This is the second time through the process. So they're showing the steps in performing the task that they just described. They're highlighting the proper technique. They're repeating it if they need to. They're checking for understanding along the way. And they're also encouraging questions. A lot of times, if our trainees are silent, it's like they're either somewhere else or they're not engaged or they just aren't understanding. So having that engagement, asking those questions, curiosity is a sign of intelligence. And that's what we want to see, is that engagement back and forth. And then after that, the trainee is experiencing it. So they're performing the task. And let's go back to the beginning with them. Let's have them explain it before they do it so that we're checking for that recognition, that recall, right? So they're explaining the steps, they're demonstrating it, we're observing them as they're demonstrating it, also coaching if needed through the process. We're not just going to let them fail. And then we're allowing them to practice until they're successful. And then the final step is assess, and that's giving feedback on their performance. So this is the fourth time through, and they're reviewing it. So we're asking the trainee to do a self-assessment. What do they think of their performance? How'd they do, right? A lot of times we're our own worst critic. So it's interesting to get that feedback from them. They may think or see things that we as the trainers don't. We also want to give them feedback and provide kudos for a job well done or where we saw that they did a really great job so that we're giving them those wins. It's hard to get wins when you're training. You feel like everything is so new. And then going back to the fire hose, the trainer saying, shot him with the fire hose. The trainee is going, I'm trying to drink from a fire hose, right? And so giving them that good feedback is always a bonus. And then based on the outcome of that evaluation, what are the next steps? And we always want to follow that with, in the early stages, different levels of check-ins. In the first week, it's daily. After that, it's weekly. And then we're 30, 60, and 90. So kind of that progressive, learning plan over the first 90 days. They're usually proficient within 45, but to really be rolling, it's about 60 to 90.
That's great. And this is a great transition into what I think is such an important way to start rounding off the end of this webinar on is outcomes, right? And so Lisa, what you're talking about is how do you measure whether the training was successful or not? And you usually don't know in the moment, right? It's those check-ins, it's the long-term retention. The theme behind this whole webinar is how do you deliver in such a way that long-term workers are going to retain what they were taught. So, Davin, I want to go to you first. Some of the outcomes that you were talking about, such as even, let's just look at how much you talked in this Teams is an example of just looking at outcome and outputs on the trainer side, but on the trainee side, obviously, outcomes very, very important. How do you assess just hey, were we successful in this training? And if not, where do we need to improve for next time?
Yeah, I think I usually try to bucket it in two kind of formats. So technical and skills based, and then because I do both technical and skills based, and then I do new hire onboarding and mentoring. And so depending on which bucket we're putting them in, there's some similarities and overlap and things that I'm looking at. I'm looking at behavior change over time. I'm checking to see what am I noticing. Application of the skills on the job as well. Are they starting to do these things? I use a lot of confidence skills. I know that Lisa had mentioned a self-assessment, but taking it a step further because sometimes we're not self-aware. We think we're really great at something and we don't really know because we don't know. So getting feedback from managers, hiring managers, whoever that supervisor is on post-training performance. So again, this is why we have to come full circle and understand what we're building before we build it and know those outcomes and build our objectives based on those outcomes, because we have to be able to provide these managers a way to say, can your person perform now based on this at 30, 60, 90? Kind of like Lisa said, especially if we're putting them in that new hire onboarding bucket. And then pre and post assessments. So keeping those questions consistent at the beginning so we can look at confidence and then clarity. And then again, at the end, we're currently doing 30, 60, 90 pulse on our new hires because we want to see over time. We should that's the goal. We should see it start to kind of trend upwards. And then obviously we want our time to competence to be what's expected, and we use that. We measure that by using the KPIs for the individual role. So in my world, we're looking at sales. So I have all of these metrics that this person needs to be hitting at certain periods of time once we've given them a little bit of ramp up time. And I will be able to tell very quickly if I was successful or not and their competence and if they're starting to perform based on where they're hitting those KPIs individually.
Great. Thanks for that. I really like that time to confidence metric. I think
Mm.
that that's a great indicator. Leighton, I'll throw it to you next. When it comes to just reverse engineering from the outcomes, how do you measure effectiveness?
Well, one of the challenges that trainers have today that they just did not have years ago, or maybe not to this extent, is that you're training people whose brains are unconsciously telling them you do not have to remember this. When it's relevant, you will type it into something and it will return it to you, right? I think I experience that every time my dad, whom I love very much, explains directions to drive somewhere, right? And he's going through it in such caring detail, and my brain is just I can just feel it like an engine being forced to slow down, and
So
I'm
true.
like, I am literally gonna type this into Googs in the moment you stop talking, right? And in many ways, that let's call it that like that friction that I'm feeling, that's many times what learners have. And so understanding that your learning nowadays has to be optimized for a very search-oriented learner who don't search with exact match terminology, but they search with associated phrases. We search a lot like we would lean over to our friend. Lisa, what was that thing you were talking about? That decandescent humidifier? What were you talking about? It like sucks water out. We don't really search with exact phrases. And so I think trainers have to consider for that is that how do we resource these people coming out of these courses in such a way that they're just naturally going to be very search oriented. I mean, that's a big part of the, know-how's focus. But there's a whole world of called mnemonics. Mnemonics is the science of memory, how we remember things. And you notice Lisa, enlisted an acronym, IDEA, right? I mean, that's going to stick with me, right? Davin talked about, different ways that she engages with the different the different kind of leadership teams and start to really identify those root problems, right? And so you'll start to hear things like the leverage of story, the leverage of using ridiculous examples and whatnot, and then that reinforcing element. But a big opportunity, I think, is just to consider how are we going to adapt this training for people who, frankly, are used to being able to just search things when it's relevant and needed and necessary. Um, the other thing to think about is how can we introduce memory cues? And sometimes those cues are silly stories, sometimes they're songs, sometimes they're acronyms, and then how do we reinforce that learning? And I just think Davin's point around thinking around this roadmap to confidence and the things we're doing tangibly to to return to this. Travis, you mentioned earlier, oftentimes we can kind of think as trainers, I did my job, I checked my box, I'm out, right? And really thinking around how do we, in a sense, really allow that root structure to dig in and it takes time and that reinforcing element to it. Um, I just want to just maybe kick it back to Dab, and she mentioned something that I think is so important with busy people, busy trainers, is I think there's such an opportunity for learning and development leaders to be able to develop simple methods, kind of like what Lisa and Davin were referring to, and then in many ways almost being like almost it sounds silly, but almost like an event planner, so to speak, where you're drawing out the elements, you're placing those within a model, and then those individuals are really maximizing their time, and yet through that they're learning that the company has a systematic way of how it identifies the root issues we need to address, structures them in high impact engaging learning activities, provides post training that's relevant to the way learners search out content today, and provides such rich experiences for the learner and the trainer. So the next time you come knocking on their door or their truck, they're like, "Oh yeah, that was a great experience. Right? I'll do that again."
Yeah, well, while you were talking, I was thinking another thing that I feel like is super important based off what you're saying too, that I haven't shared, and I'm sure you're all doing it in some form or fashion. But any type of deliverable or something they can walk away tangible with that is short and sweet and to the point, because I don't want to read a 4-page document after I've sat through a 2-hour training. So something short and sweet. And then if you ask me, what is my goal in 2025? It has been to make my company self-servicing. Like, I need you to know where the tools that I've created for you are. That's those supplementary documents and things. And I need you to access them without asking me or anybody else. And so giving them the tools to be successful, because they're there. I just need you to know how to access them. So spending that time with them. But I think how we get to that point of kind of meshing it all together is really, I use a form when I'm going down that consulting approach, and I have that conversation of, diving into what's important. And then the whole time, I'm taking feedback for myself, and then enlisting feedback. I usually invite a few colleagues that are not on the end user, and I say, what can we do better? And then also I'm usually walking away with how I'm going to, whatever I should have done better, that's what I'm going to use to start keying in to some additional ongoing learning.
Awesome. Hey, speaking of tangible takeaways, we've got about 4 minutes left. So we're going to go lightning round here. Lisa, I'll throw it to you first, but I'm curious, there's lots that we've talked about, 30, 60, 90-day reviews, mnemonics. I heard Leighton suggest a song or something like that. You can grab your acoustic guitar. What if you would encourage, someone who's on this, what is one small step that they can take to modify their approach coming out of this webinar that's just going to reorient their workforce a little bit closer to those long-term outcomes that are so important?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So in my experience, the companies that I've come in contact with, they have everything or a good portion of it. It's just not structured in a way where people can access it or where they know where it's at. And so having a platform, having a program, having a filing method, something that you can structure where you put all of those training documents, that's a starting point. At least it's there. You can share it with your team. They can have access to it. A lot of times they don't even have access, right? So, so that's a good starting point. One of my favorites and something that I'm passionate about is also a really great orientation. And that doesn't take a ton of time. It just takes, somebody to really kind of take that on. And if you can make somebody's day one great, you're off to a really good start. So those are kind of my things. I think one thing that I wanted to maybe leave the discussion with when I was thinking about this is something that has resonated true for me recently. I've been on kind of my own personal growth journey the last year. But somebody said, choose your hard. You can either do something hard now that's going to make, the rest of your life or whatever easier, more enjoyable, whatever it is, or you can continue doing what you're doing and eventually you're going to have to do something hard or it's going to get hard. So choose your hard. Is it now? Is it later? What do you want to do? So
that's a great takeaway. That's a great takeaway. I'm hearing lots around, easy access to training and how to. If you know us at Know How, that's something we're really passionate about as well. Davin, let me throw it to you next. Takeaway, we can't boil the whole ocean, but what's one small step people can take coming out of this webinar?
Yeah, I think managers or learning leaders, the first thing they need to do is look at their trainings right now, like sit down and actively reflect on what they've already built, because it is a little daunting to think, great, everything I've done sucks and now I have to rebuild everything, right? So that's not realistic. But what you can do is start by asking yourself, the simple question is, have I built what I'm expecting these people to walk away with? And if the answer is no, that's a great starting point, is just to acknowledge that, maybe there's some small things that you can go in and start implementing to kind of shift the outcome. And then the second part would be, how are you engaging them? If you're getting lower scores and the confidence after, if you're getting lower scores, and if this was relevant to my job, start looking at how you're engaging your audience. Because if it is very wah-wah and you're talking a lot, that's probably going to relate to some of those scores. Not to say I've heard some really great, keynote speakers that just talk and it's been life-changing. But they do, kind of like Leighton said, they use all of those different approaches like storytelling, and they're grabbing my attention. They've read the room and they know who their audience is to keep me engaged. And then the final thing, this really goes more towards like managers and directors, is it's super simple. 1 week after a training, instead of it being solely on the learning department, is to say, what did you take away from that training? Put them on the hot seat and make the learner acknowledge, I went to this training, and it's uncomfortable because they're like, oh gosh, I don't even remember. But force them to have that conversation on what do they take away from that training, and then what they should have taken away from that training, right? If it's a restoration orientation, you have an idea of what they should have taken away. And so I think that is a great first step in understanding what they got, short-term retention, and then using that as a building block to develop more and more intentional follow-ups.
Awesome. Leighton, we're wrapping up here, tight on time, but you get the last word. What's one thing you would leave people walking out of this webinar with?
It takes time to be a great trainer. I think it takes time to build a great training program. Have great snacks. That's a huge thing. I'm telling you, a lot of the people going through this training, let's be honest, a lot of it is just a bunch of young folks. And the roadmap to you becoming a great trainer, have a reputation that, hey, if you show up, you're gonna have some great snacks. And I'll tell you that with this profile of worker, that goes a long way. And they will ride alongside you as you become a better trainer if they know that they are going to have some good old snackies. So I know that may sound silly, but it makes a big difference.
That's great. Well, hey, it may take a while to re-engineer your entire training program, but it's not hard to pick up a few snacks at Walgreens on the way over. So that's a good starting point. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. This was a great discussion. I think we went around Laura's house a few times. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but
Good job.
thank you. This was great. I hope it was valuable for everyone in the chat. This is going to be a monthly series, and so we're very excited to continue this discussion and look at all the different aspects of how do you build training that works for today's worker and what the future of training looks like in the restoration industry. We'll wrap it up there. Thanks especially to our guests for your time this afternoon, and we'll keep the conversation going. Thanks, everyone.